Well, welcome to this week's Continuing the Podcast conversation. I'm Abby Davis, and I'm sitting in for Colin, who is not here, and I'm obviously not Colin. So, hi, welcome. Hi, Craig.
Hi,
How are you doing? How are you doing today?
I think I'm pretty good.
Think good?
Yeah, I didn't sleep super well last night, so I'm just a little bit bleary still.
Okay. Is it the summer weather change?
No, it's I got a call pretty late at night about something that turned out to be totally fine, not a big deal, but it threw my rhythm off a little bit, so I just didn't quite go down as much as I wanted to. It's just always just felt like I was a little bit lighter on my sleep. I think I actually said this week I'm a delicate little flower when it comes to sleep, and it doesn't take much to throw me off a little bit. So it's not like I was awake all night. I can tell I wasn't 100% present in my sleep. Yeah.
And you are not a coffee drinker. Is that
I am
right?
actually a coffee drinker. It's new, but it's new. You're absolutely right.
I feel like I've seen you with a Mountain Dew, but not a coffee.
You still will usually see me with a Mountain Dew. I allow myself one Mountain Dew a day. Okay. Sometimes my assistant Lindsay, she's gotten the little cans. Oh. Sometimes I let myself do two of those. But I actually do a coffee every morning now. Okay.
Do you like the ritual of coffee or the actual taste of the coffee?
It's actually not the ritual of it. I don't even know that I love the taste of coffee. I'm learning to like it. Okay. To me, it's more that it's a lot less sugar. Oh, that's the big thing. I just realize I'm consuming way too much sugar and need to cut that out a little bit. Yeah.
Coffee is such a part of my routine at this point in time. I think if I cut it out, I would be I'd be half asleep just from not doing it than anything else. But
I definitely need the caffeine. Yeah. That's the main reason I'm doing it. It's caffeine with less sugar.
Less sugar, fair enough. Which apparently we all need to have less sugar. That's what they tell us. Okay, well, we covered a lot in the sermon this week. I think there's a lot we could jump into, but I was curious to know, we found Jacob. He's running for his life from Esau. You kind of talked about the background of he's made some poor choices. His parents made some poor choices. He's finding himself in this place he doesn't really want to be. No. And he has this dream, and we talked a little bit about his reaction to the dream, but I'm wondering if you could kind of go back to the dream itself. Yeah. It talks about this scene that he sees, the ladder from earth to heaven, and it talks about angels ascending and descending, and it's kind of become the popular cultural norm, Jacob's ladder. So I was wondering if you could actually dive a little bit into that.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. I almost, in fact, I do a sermon pitch on Tuesdays where I kind of share here's kind of the rough content of what I'm planning on doing this weekend and get some feedback. And we talked a little bit about how cultural it is, and Jacob's ladder is a little cultural, but probably the more widespread cultural version is the Stairway to Heaven.
Yes.
Right, so you think of the Led Zeppelin song, and I never really liked the song, but it's pretty deeply implanted in our culture. And there's no indication that song was written about this, but most people kind of make that association, and there may be some loose connection to it. Here's what I actually think is really interesting about, especially if you think about Stairway to Heaven and that cultural element. I don't know if you know the lyrics of the song, a little bit before your time. It's a little before my time, actually, but there's a line, and I thought I might even sing it on Sunday and see if people could fill in the end of it. But there's a lady who's sure all that glitters is gold, and she's buying a stairway to heaven. That's how it goes. Okay. And what's interesting to me about that is the idea of Stairway to Heaven and buying a Stairway to Heaven is the idea that I have to go from heaven to earth, and that's typical religion. I got to work my way into this. I have to somehow claw my way up to the top, and then hopefully God will come out to the gate, and if I've done a good enough job, he'll open the gate and let me in, right? What's interesting about the dream is that the Hebrew, the NIV translates it rests upon the earth. And that's a good translation of the Hebrew. I wouldn't argue with that translation in the slightest. But my sense as I read it in Hebrew especially is the implication is it started in heaven and it ended on earth. Not the other way around, which is like I'm climbing to heaven. No, it's more of a God has already done this. And that's actually a pretty beautiful picture of grace. I didn't want to build too much on it because, again, literally it rests upon the earth, but the implication is it didn't start there. it started there and came to rest. It's a little bit of it's the same language that you get, like the ark came to rest upon Ararat. That's where it ended up. It's not where it started. So the stairway actually starts in heaven, and so God being there on a stairway that starts in heaven really does speak to something of the gospel of God being willing to come down to us. So I actually think that's kind of an interesting cultural aspect of this, because at least in that song and that element of culture, we've got it backwards.
Right.
It almost entirely misses the point that we actually see in the biblical text. I'm curious, where else in our culture do you see the concept of Jacob's ladder showing up?
Well, I think within Christian culture specifically, I feel like you see the tension between kind of what you just said. It's this works-based salvation versus faith and grace-based salvation. And when I was reading it, I was reading Genesis earlier this year and kind of went into my little footnotes, and it took me to John, talking more when Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And so thinking about the ladder, as you said, something that God initiated, he has brought to us. It's not something I'm doing. And that ladder, if we were to say that ladder is Jesus, he is the only way. We don't get to kind of pick and choose another way, which I think is often in our culture too. It's like, well, that might be your ladder, but it's not my ladder. Right. And it's not the only ladder. So I think you're absolutely right. In Christian culture, so Led Zeppelin, she's buying a stairway. Nope, you got it wrong. But I think you're absolutely right. You're touching on something there, which is even in Christian culture, we get it wrong. It's not Jacob's ladder. Yeah. It's God's ladder. It's God's ladder.
And why do we call it Jacob's ladder? Well, and I think if I weren't looking at the story and I weren't listening to anybody and I just made an assumption, I'd go, well, it's the ladder by which Jacob made his way to heaven. So maybe he didn't build it, maybe God built it, but it's still that's how he gets there. He didn't get on the ladder. He doesn't get on the stairway. Yeah. Right? It's in no sense is it Jacob's ladder. And when he calls the place where the ladder rests the house of God, Bethel, what he's implying is this is where God comes from there to here. So the movement is entirely God-driven and coming to earth. That's very gospel-y. And yet even in Christian culture where we kind of get the gospel, we still call it Jacob's ladder, which utterly confuses, if not completely inverts, the entire concept of it. It's God's ladder, and he's using it to come to us, not Jacob's, and he's not using it to go to God. Because he doesn't have to, because God's come to him. Yeah.
And kind of, it also makes me think when you say it's not Jacob's ladder, he's not building it. I also think of like the Tower of Babel, what man's trying to build.
Oh, good.
We're trying to get so high up, and I feel like God kind of looks down and goes, oh, nice try. That's not going to make it.
In fact, I'm going to keep you from doing that because I don't want you thinking that way.
And it's not going to get you anywhere. Yeah. So I'm going to confuse that process, and I'm going to show you the way. You got to wait a little while. So that's a great connection. Yeah. And kind of building on that idea of it's God initiated, it's God's grace. You talked a little bit about how, not a little bit, a lot bit about how, Jacob's having this dream and he's hearing the grace of God, and then it rests on him to respond to it. He needs to take some action. And we talked about the reorientation of his life a little bit and things that he needed to let go and maybe recategorize a little bit. You touched on money as being one of those things that can kind of block us from that relationship with God. And just as we talked about in the ladder, that's our union. We're promised that union with God through Christ, but our communion with him, our relationship with him can be blocked by other things. Yeah. So you touched on money, but from a discipleship perspective, or as we as congregants are thinking beyond money, what are some of those things that you might put in that category too?
Yeah, so what's interesting about money itself is how central it seems to be to all the other ones. It's not the only one, but it is the only one that Jesus elevates to the level of a potential Lord, right? So he obviously has instructions about sexuality, divorce, selfishness, all kinds of stuff. But it's only money that he says you can't serve two lords. And then he says, well, obviously, you can't serve God and money, so you can't serve two lords. God is obviously one of the lords. Well, in that analogy, money then becomes one of the potential lords that's battling it out. And he doesn't do that with any other issue in life. which probably explains why it is that money comes up so often. And I think what happens is that it's like if God says don't do something, and I go, well, I really want to do it, and I go do it, right? I'm making myself Lord, essentially. I'm deciding for myself what's right and wrong, and that's a problem. I think the issue about money is it's an external Lord. It's not me. It's something else that's driving my life. And then it leads to all these other things. And so I think for Jacob, what's interesting, the reason that money was so central there is because everything Jacob was doing was essentially driven by his discipleship to possessions, to money, to power, right? Because everything he's done, his deception of his father, his tricking his brother, all those things. How do I get these things, right? Because those things were Lord to him. And so I think that's why money was so central. And I think it's why money is so central in the Bible, because it actually leads to so many other issues. But it's obviously not the only one. It's just the only one that Jesus elevates to that level. But yeah, I think selfishness is, it's probably a close second, right? Yeah. And it's tied up even in the money thing, right? Because I want money so I can get my stuff and so that I can dictate my own life and I don't have to work for a person. And so I can just be self-driven, which, in some ways, that's the whole Garden of Eden piece of it. It goes back to that. And I'm just thinking through this out loud now, maybe selfishness is at the core of all sin. And then money becomes the Lord that basically says, I can let you be selfish.
Yeah.
But if we drive it back farther, selfishness can definitely get in the way. Yeah, and you talk about block our relationship with God. I often think about it like in that relationship, in that union with Jesus, there should be a flow, right? A flow of intimacy, a flow of blessing, a flow of strength. And it's a little bit like, remember when you kink the hose, right? The flow's still there. But something is, the car drove over the hose and it's sitting on the hose. And I think money is one of the big cars. Selfishness is one of the big cars. Yeah. Any of those things that are basically choosing to live other than God's called us to, they start to put some pressure on the hose and they start to reduce the flow. Yeah. And so then it's not that we lose our salvation, but we stop experiencing the joy of it. We stop experiencing the flow of power in it. We stop experiencing the intimacy that should be in that relationship.
Yeah. I thought you talked a little bit about how as believers, we often get the grace issue wrong. Like we're very excited to talk about grace as it applies to ourselves. And we talk about our excitement of God's grace applied to someone else's life. And then I think there's an irony that when we actually see God's grace radically applied to somebody, we're kind of like, ooh, that was a lot, especially when they become powerful instruments for God. Mm-hmm. So how do you feel like, I guess my question in that is, even your conversation with Tanner last week, you talked a little bit about the difference between kind of being an individualistic person who sees everything as just about me and God's grace is here. How do we kind of expand our view of what's blocking me isn't just blocking me. It has a ripple effect into all of God's people. And how do we want that grace, not just for ourselves, but for everyone? Do you have thoughts about that?
I love the way you said that right there at the end, that how do we want that grace for other people? Because I think that's the problem. We don't.
Not really.
Honestly, we don't even want grace for ourselves. We need it, and we recognize our need for it, but we would prefer to have performed well enough that it wasn't necessary, which is partly this drive to make it look like we've got it all together so that I don't actually need grace. But certainly when we look at other people, we don't really want grace for them. We want the wrathful God, right? We want what people think of as the Old Testament God, which is all kinds of messed up because the Old Testament God's unbelievably gracious, as we saw even in this story. But we want the loving, kind, merciful, gracious God for us, but we don't want that for other people, ultimately because we're selfish. Yeah. Right?
Kind of comes back to that sin.
Yeah, they've hurt me, and I want them to get what's coming to them. Yeah. They've kept me from something that I want, and I want God to get them for that. And so even the ability to want grace for somebody else requires a humility in the sense of it's not about me. Yeah. that's just so hard to get to.
Yeah.
Right? Probably because it's tied up in that most base of sins, which is selfishness, self-directedness. Yeah. I mean, I wish I could say that I always wanted grace for people, but like that's until they cut me off in traffic, and then I don't want grace for them. Like I don't want full on wrath, but just a little bit of wrath would be kind of nice. Yeah. How do you get to that point of wanting grace for other people? I think it's a closeness to Jesus. I think the closer you get to Jesus, the more you start to look at other people the way he looks at them. Yeah. And that sounds like a very spiritual answer, but I don't know that there's a better one.
I think simple, though, is
best.
You
grow in your relationship with Jesus, and it transforms the way you think about other people, and suddenly you start going, I actually am really sorry for the life that you're living because I know what it means for you. Yeah. Rather than I'm mad that you're opposing God or you're doing something that goes against what I want, it's I genuinely feel sad for you that you want these things because you're far from God. And because you're far from God, you're living in darkness. And of course it's confusing in the darkness. Yeah. Of course you're picking a random direction and moving because you don't want to stay stuck where you are, but because you're in darkness, you don't know where to go. And that's a really sad thing rather than a mad thing. Right. And that's the hard transition. I've never thought about it in those terms. But as you grow in Christ's likeness, you move from that's a mad thing to that's a sad thing. And I feel differently about you. I'm not mad at you as much as I am sad for you. Yeah.
I have found it's interesting, when you read Genesis, and clearly right now we're talking about some of the patriarchs. And I think there's this natural desire to kind of want them to be these perfect people because God used them powerfully. And, and you look at, they had messy, messy lives. And even in this story about Jacob right here, it's like, gosh, you still want him to be just a little bit better than he is. And as his story goes forward, he's still going to struggle with that. So for someone, I guess maybe to kind of wrap it up, for someone who's looking at this and looking at the story of Jacob, even right here and going, wow, this is the guy God picked, huh? Like this is what our patriarch is. How would you say, what would kind of be your encouragement to someone who's looking at that going, ugh, I'm not even sure I like this guy?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's so many layers to that. Yeah, it's interesting. You're right. We look at the patriarchs, or we look at the people from the Bible, and we really want them to be better than they often are. Mm-hmm. So much so, I will tell you that I always get a little bit anxious, is probably too strong a word, but there's just a little bit of this. I know it's coming whenever I preach something like this, because I will have people, usually most people, come up to me and they'll be kind of mad at me because they'll be like, "Yeah, you're not respecting these people from the Bible." I'm like, I'm just trying to read the text that we're given, and I think you're missing some stuff in the text, right? I think Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob both are kind of messed up. Yeah. Right. And so like even this week, somebody came up to me and he wasn't upset. He actually had a really interesting observation about something I had chosen not to go down the rabbit hole on, which was Jacob does reorient his life. He does respond to God, and that's all positive. It's movement in the right direction, small steps at least. But even in the process of doing that, he does kind of an interesting thing. He says, if you will do this for me, right? It's conditional. Yeah. And to me, that says, he's still in process. And I'm actually planning on picking that up later in this narrative arc, because there's a bunch more stories. And I just decided I don't really have time to go into this now. Let's present it for what it is, which is a positive, but it's got this little edge that he's not all the way there. And you're going to continue to see it. He's not all the way there. And so it's in the text, right? And yet people will get upset because like, well, you're not respecting, you're not being reverential to these people. And I'm like, yeah, those aren't my model, right? I mean, can I learn some things from some of the things they do? Absolutely, but the Bible never attempts to present them as even necessarily as role models. It's so much more about the God who works in spite of people, right? And so for me, the encouragement is when I see Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob for who they actually are, as the text fully presents them, when I start reading between the lines and seeing things the way that the first readers of those texts would have read them, and going, they wouldn't have gone, oh, these guys are amazing heroes. They would have gone, yeah. When I start seeing them more like that, there's this I love the way you said it. Is this really the guy you picked? Like, oh, I don't have to be perfect to be picked. And I'm not trying to be pastoral with the P's there. There's just a lot of P words. I don't have to have it all together to be loved by God, to be chosen by God, to be used by God, right? And we often use the phrase that God can draw a straight line with a crooked stick. And they're almost all crooked sticks except for Jesus, right? The thing is that the fact that God can draw a straight line with a crooked stick isn't an excuse for staying crooked, right? And the experience of the stick will be much better the less crooked they are, but it's not dependent on me because it's not my stairway going, let's swing it back around full circle, right? It's not my ladder to heaven. It's His grace coming to me. And so I find real encouragement in that every time I mess up, it doesn't necessarily bring me one step closer to God going, okay, I'm just done, right?
Right.
That's an encouragement for me. He picked very imperfect people. And also it's so different than the characters you see in so many of the other religious texts in the world, right? Yeah. Who are they're perfect, right? And you're like, oh yeah, but I'm pretty sure you made these stories up. Right. Man, every hero in the Bible other than Jesus is kind of a wreck, sometimes a villain, right? I mean, David, right?
Messy man.
Yeah, just and mean sometimes, right? Messy and mean and conflicted and yet God's grace transforms.
Yeah.
And it's that response that's so powerful.
Yeah. I love how you said earlier that, it's that shift of our brains from being mad about the grace applied to sad about people who haven't experienced it yet. And also, I would imagine, I'm just thinking in my own life, learning to celebrate the grace that has been applied to other people in a different way. We celebrate when someone gets baptized, but there's so many other times in our lives when we've gotten ourselves in a sticky spot and we get that grace, that assurance of mercy and grace from God. And that's worth celebrating within the context of knowing you've gotten yourself there.
Yeah. What you said there, it made me think about, I was having a conversation with my oldest daughter recently about, there's a song that's all over Christian radio right now called The Author. Have you heard it?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Brandon Lake and...
the other guy.
The one of the trio Jonas Brothers guy, right?
I was going to say boy band guy, yeah.
And it's interesting that there's been a lot of criticism of Brandon Lake for doing that song with him because there's no really obvious unconflicted, categorical, black and white indication that Mr. Jonas has become Mr. Jesus, right?
Yeah.
We don't know that. And so it's been interesting for me to watch the animosity is probably too strong a word, but the suspicion and the skepticism among the Christians about that. And as my daughter and I were talking, she said something really profound. She said, but maybe he's on a journey. And the fact that he was willing to record that song, which is deeply Christian, with a clearly Christian artist, and the fact, and there's been criticism of Brandon Lake for because he's kind of done a series of these lately. Yeah. What are you doing hanging out with these non-Christians? Oh, you mean like Jesus?
Yeah.
And joining them, and it seems like God's doing something through him. He's entering into these conversations and these relationships, and people are like, well, that's great, but you shouldn't be doing music with them. But maybe that partnership in writing those songs is part of what God's doing with them. And I think what it's happening is it's what we were just talking about. It's Christians, they just keep losing track of grace, right? Because, in their minds, the Jonas Brothers is secular artists, and secular artists, they're doing all kinds of damage, and God needs to get them. Yeah. And you're like, he is, just not the way you thought. He's not getting them by, pouring wrath. Yeah. He's getting them. Maybe he's drawing them to himself, and yet there's a lot of suspicion. Now that can't be what's happening. Right. To me, that's a pretty clear sign of a lack of a handle on grace, right? Even when you're suspicious that they might be on a journey to Jesus, why? Because you don't want it to happen. Right. Why on earth wouldn't you want it to happen? Yeah. Because I like grace when it's on me, but I'd prefer it not on the people that I'm already upset with.
Yeah.
Which, there's a whole book in the Bible based on that, right? That's Jonah, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Jonah's got a handle on it. He didn't like it. He's like, this is why I didn't want to come, God, because I knew you were going to do this.
Save these people.
Yeah, and I don't want to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we're often more like Jonah than Jesus.
Yeah. All right. Well, anything you want to tease for us going forward as we keep in with this series? And
so this next week we're gonna see we're gonna kind of see Jacob get his deception comes back on him.
Yeah.
And I just think that's interesting because we haven't really seen it yet. We've seen a lot of grace and maybe it's kind of confusing. Why haven't we seen, and my argument from last week was, because the story wasn't about Jacob. The story was about Isaac and kind of his setting up the context. And that's why you don't see an evaluation of the other characters, but we're gonna see Jacob kind of get his, and in what my Eastern people would call karma. It's kind of what it feels like, right?
Yeah.
We would just call it consequences. Yeah. There are consequences for sin, and he experiences them, and quite honestly, they end up haunting him for the rest of his life, because the two women that he ends up married to, even though they're sisters, they're not best friends, and there's a bitterness in their relationship that affects him. Mm-hmm. So we're going to get to see that, and at the same time, we're going to see God is setting up something really powerful and profound, even though it's deeply broken. And that's grace, not only who it comes to, but what it does with the brokenness when it comes there.
And such a good reminder in all this that we're not going to thwart God's plans. It's going to happen either way.
Yeah. So. Yeah. The question is whether or not you're going to enjoy them.
Enjoy it. Or enjoy the ride, or just be angry about it. But yeah. Well, thanks for chatting with me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being here.
We'll see you next time.
God bless. Have a great week.
Bye.
This podcast is hosted by Colin McFarland along with Craig Smith. We are mixed, edited, and produced by Zach Anderson. Our creative director is Colin McFarland. Maddie Brower is our SEO and copy specialist. The Continuing the Conversation feed is part of the Mission Hills Podcast Network in Littleton, Colorado, and available for download wherever you get your audio and video podcasts. Thanks for listening.